Our next speaker this morning is Justin Mohamed, who serves as the CEO of Reconciliation Australia. Mr. Mohamed is an Aboriginal man and a member of the Gooreng Gooreng Nation near Bundaberg in Queensland, Australia. He's dedicated the last 25 years to working toward building a stronger and healthier nation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia. Now, Reconciliation Australia seeks to create a more just, equitable, and reconciled Australia through key programs and initiatives, including reconciliation action plans, reconciliation in schools, early learning, and National Reconciliation Week. Justin himself has been active in the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organization, the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organization, and the National Health Leadership Forum. Please join me in welcoming Justin Mohamed.
Thank you for that introduction and for the presentation. It was such a learning curve for me, even though you do see it and hear it, to hear it firsthand, and the stories and the pain which comes out with truth is quite remarkable. So I'd like to say thank you to the organisers for inviting me here, and say that I enjoy coming to Canada. This is my third time. First time in Winnipeg, once in Vancouver and Edmonton. So I understand and appreciate this great country, which reminds me a lot of Australia, as the depth and breadth of the country and the different sort of landscapes there is across this nation reminds me a lot like Australia, except it's a lot warmer in Australia than here, if this is the summer. We've got winter. I said that I live in Canberra at the moment, which winter is around minimum temperatures are about 0 to -1 or 2. That's a minimum, and people laughed at me yesterday. But before I go any further, I'd like to, acknowledge the land which we stand on. It's a protocol from in Australia that, and my elders would have me do, but right throughout Australia now, there's a strong protocol that we do acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which we meet on in all different forums. And so I like to take that tradition that we have in Australia, as a Gooreng Gooreng man from Bundaberg, Queensland, all the way over here in Winnipeg. I like to acknowledge the Aboriginal people of this land which we meet on. I like to pay my respects to elders both past and present. I also like to acknowledge the young people in this room. They are our future elders and our leaders, and without them we don't have a future. So I'd like to acknowledge them because there is a great future we've got ahead of ourselves. This land, and I say this in Australia when we meet on different countries' land, as we call it in Australia when we move around, that every one of my country's in Bundaberg, Queensland. That's my traditional home and my traditional lands which I grew up on. So when we move around, we do acknowledge, and the thing which I think a lot of sometimes acknowledgements take place, and in Australia we've got to be careful that this acknowledgement and of the traditional owners doesn't become just a ritual or something which happens and the non-Indigenous people just say, well, we've done that, we've ticked the box, let's move on with our meeting. But understanding the land which we stand on, and without the first people of this nation, of this land, we wouldn't be here. And that's right across in every Indigenous peoples right across the world, that they've spent tens of thousands of years occupying, looking after, caring for country. And it's an honour to be able to live, have meetings, raise our families on, and many times in other people's country. So I'd like to pay tribute and honour to the traditional owners of this land. In Australia, we have an ancient practice, and we like to welcome so we can move through and do our business in the different lands that we may live and work on. And for over 40,000 years, our culture has been thriving through an environment which in the last 200 plus years has not been the most an environment which things usually do thrive in. It's been an environment which has tried to oppress, tried to eliminate, and has look down upon its First People. And I know that over the stories, and many stories even heard last night, there is very strong similarities between our country and your country. The residential schools, we have the stolen generation. And we have a similar sort of pattern which is happening. The stolen generation, which was, we received an apology by our former Prime Minister in 2008, long overdue, but it came. The report was handed down, bringing them home report, bringing the children home report was handed down almost 15 years ago. And we now know that right at this time, there is more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care or have been removed from their families today than there was 15 years ago. So there is a fear there could be another stolen generation taking place as we continue to work and move forward. So the reconciliation movement, as I'm here to speak about, I don't know if I'm that qualified to speak to you about reconciliation, because in Australia, I'm interested to hear, because a lot of people that I've spoken to say, you Aussies are doing it pretty well over there. Well, I've got to tell you, the grass is not that greener over that side of the world. We sit over that side and talk about how well Canada's doing, and they use us Canadians with treaties, and we don't have a treaty, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But sometimes as Indigenous people where we live, we do look elsewhere and we think that things might be better on the other side. But hearing some of the stories last night, and obviously the conversations that I've been privileged to take, to have opportunity to speak to and speak into, I think we've all got our difficult challenges ahead of ourselves. But on the same token, I think we've all got a lot of strengths as Aboriginal people that we can share with each other and learn from each other. So the reconciliation movement in Australia is about recognising and healing the past and committing to a better future. A future which we value first Australians and provide justice and equity for all. In all nations, relationships and respect is the fundamental to reconciliation. Knowledge and pride in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures is also key to this reconciliation journey in Australia. So before I talk any more, I might just give you a quick overview about our history in Australia. It's very quick. But as people may know, that in 1788, the British came to Australia and invaded the shores of our great nation. And at that time, there was over 250 separate languages being spoken by diverse people that made up the First Nation, the First Peoples of Australia. Unlike other settler colonial nations, like Canada, the US, New Zealand, which signed treaties with the British, there was no treaty signed with the Aboriginal people of Australia. And still to this day, there is not one treaty in Australia signed. The people which came into Australia denied Aboriginal people our ownership of our land under the fraudulent legal doctrine of terra nullius, land belonging to nobody or no one. We still grapple with this. This is something which has been deeply entrenched in modern Australia, and only now the non-Indigenous people of Australia are starting to understand the deep connection that we as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have had to our land for over 40,000 years. And I believe it has done our country a disservice because they haven't fully been able to grab hold of the value that we have had in this nation and of our nation, and they've pushed it aside for the last 200 years. Reconciliation Australia, we are preparing with a wide range of people the groundwork for the next generation. We believe the generation which has gone past, the last generation which has moved us to this point now, that it's the responsibility of the next generation, the generation now, that we don't let go of what our elders have put in place and fought for. People like my grandparents who worked, and their main ambition was to make sure that their children and their grandchildren received an education and lived a life that was better than they had, that we can't afford to let that gift slip by. So it's this generation and the generations to come that reconciliation are focusing on to make sure that we can achieve reconciliation for our nation. We relaunched a report early this year called The State of Reconciliation in Australia. Our organisation is it's a non-government organisation. We receive some funds from government and others from other funds we receive from donations from individuals and other groups. And it's been over near 15 years since a report like this has been handed down. So we thought it was time that we took a snapshot of where reconciliation was in Australia, what we needed to improve, what we did well, and obviously what we need to do better in the future. And this speaks about the vision and a shared language around reconciliation for all Australians to consider. The report, which we launched in February this year, highlights milestones achieved in Australia's reconciliation journey over 25 years and recommends a way forward if we are to realise our potential as a reconciled nation. The report comes at a critical time in Australia. Australia's history at the moment, with reconciliation as being increasingly important part of the national conversation. And there's been a clear message of this conversation is that until we achieve true reconciliation, we fall well short of reaching our full potential as a nation. This is not just coming from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but the broader public, corporate leaders, sporting identities, and some politicians are realising that we haven't met our full potential as a nation because we have not fully reconciled ourselves, listened to the truths, and learnt from the shortcomings of our country and the value of what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people bring to our nation. The report also gives a clear framework of defined reconciliation and how we can measure our progress. In the report, it's a fairly large report, as most reports are, but there's 5 key dimensions which we like to focus on, and we believe that we're going to build, well, this is the cornerstones or the stepping stones that we need to have to build reconciliation in our nation and to address the wrongs which have been had happened in the past and things which are happening right now in the current. The 5 dimensions are race relations, which talks really strongly about racism, equality and equity, which equality is about getting those the health, the education, employment, housing, those parts of our life that we can share equally across our nation. The equity, well, we know that there has been there's a big gap which has to be made, and there certainly needs to be stronger equity built into all programs. And there's a little bit of a illustration, some people may have seen it. It's a cartoon which I think is quite, it shows equality and equity, which sometimes can be confusing. But it's a cartoon of 3 children which are looking over a fence onto a football ground. And there's the taller one, the middle one, and the little one. And there's only one that can look over the fence if they're standing on the ground. That's the taller one. He can just see over it. So they give everyone the equal footing, and they give them all a little box to stand on. And the bigger one can see further, the middle one can see over the fence, but the little one still can't see over the fence. But everyone's got an equal, so everyone's been given the equal. So the equity is that the little one needs something taller to have the same view as everybody else. And I believe that's something which our governments struggle with a little bit, about why, if everyone has equal opportunity to get a job or education, why can't we just make this happen? But we believe there's a strong equity piece that needs to be built in. The third one is unity. Obviously, having a unified nation is very important. 4th one is the institutional integrity. This is about our institutions, the integrity which our institutions run with. And I think, similar to Canada, Australia is built with institutions. This university is an institution. There's government institutions. When I talk about institutions, there's the corporate world institutions, there's sporting institutions. We're calling on every institution in Australia that there's integrity within the institutions to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And then particularly the government and how the government governs itself around Indigenous affairs. And the 5th one, which is not the least, but this is historical acceptance. Within Australia, it's been very, very difficult to get historical acceptance. It took many, many years for the Prime Minister to finally apologise for the past wrongs for the stolen generation. And there's been a number of other incidents which I'll talk about, but as soon as it raises its voice, there's a massive national debate about certain things. And one of the ones which have been recently said, a university in Australia recently in the paper mentioned, or they teach their children, that Australia wasn't a settled nation, but it was an invaded nation. And it was a national front page story across all of our news, nationally spoken about. Politicians got pulled into it. And so there was a debate about, was Australia settled or was it invaded? And it was on all the talk shows. And this just shows us that there is such a lack of understanding. And more recently, we've got an election process at the moment. Another Prime Minister could be in the wings for Australia, maybe. We've had 5 in the last 5 years, so another one won't be any different. But both the leaders of the major parties are discussing and talking about Aboriginal issues, more so this last couple of days. But the Prime Minister, he did mention in an article, and he spoke and he put it very bluntly, that Australia was invaded. And that was the first time we've heard of a politician, a Prime Minister, mention those words. So historical acceptance is very important, as there's still a lot of truth to be told, which people really find difficult to speak about. But we do know when these 3 dimensions are woven together, we believe that it will be the fabric to create reconciliation in Australia. We cannot just continually try to fix one particular problem. And in Australia, our politicians and generally people would say, if you get educated and get a job, everything will be right. We're saying that a job or education is only part of the solution. Or the apology. We'll say sorry, then we can move on and get along with our day-to-day life. The apology was a great time in Australia, and many Aboriginal people really felt it was received well and it was heartfelt. But we do know that without action that proceeds from that, the apology is just words. And after about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, business as usual came about. Our politicians and many members of the public said, we said sorry, what else do we have to do? And I like to say, and I relay this story to some of my non-Indigenous friends who have that sort of a view. I say that if someone comes in and takes your child or kills your child, and you want to know who did this, and that you know that it was wrong and that there was a law that was broken, that you'd want justice for that. And I'd say, and then if the police found that person and they go to court and you go and see that justice is being served, the magistrate hands down his decision, and then, okay, the justice part, the truth part's been talked about. You walk out of that courthouse, if someone came up to you now, you've got your apology or you've got your justice, now get on with your life, how would you feel? There's a healing process which has to be embraced by the people around you and obviously by the society which you live in. And that's where we believe Australia has fallen short. The apology was great, but there hasn't been a process of justice which has come through. The truth has been there, justice hasn't been served, and definitely healing is something which we grapple with as a nation, about allowing our people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the time to heal from these wrongs of the past. So race relations, we need to ensure that there is a strong and positive way forward. In the next part, what I'm going to speak about, I like to think about the nation which I'd like to live in, where I like to see my children and my future grandchildren, which I don't have any as yet, but my future grandchildren to live. I'm sure my grandparents, and what I've heard from my grandmother, who's still alive at 89, my grandfather, before he passed, they had a dream, they had a vision of what they would like to see their family and their community to live. So I've written down a few things here, and I've detailed this in a way where it's predominantly around Australia, but I think you could put your nation in here, and maybe it might have some connection to it. So the future which I see that in Australia, or in your case, Canada, where there will be race relations will be seen as positive, not negative. where relationships between Aboriginal and non-Indigenous Australians are free from racism and are built on trust and respect. And an Australia where Aboriginal people can participate equally in all areas of life, where the unique rights of Aboriginal peoples are recognised and upheld. It will be an Australia unified by recognising and valuing Aboriginal cultures and heritage, unified by celebrating our culture as a proud part of our shared national identity. In this Australia, reconciliation will be actively supported by the nation's political and business institutions and community and social sectors. In this Australia, there will be a widespread acceptance of our nation's history, particularly the wrongs of the past. The ongoing impact of these wrongs will be understood, and we will commit to never repeating them. This historical acceptance, like all dimensions of reconciliation, is critical. We will only be reconciled nation when these dimensions are clearly and actively woven together. So Australia has a relevantly short history of reconciliation compared to other countries. Some may, it's a bit longer than others, but we have a countless number of people, I'm sure, in this country has dedicated themselves to this movement. They may not call it reconciliation, but have dedicated themselves to make sure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, Aboriginal people, have moved forward and addressing the issues which confront the generations. In '67, we saw that 9 in 10 Australians voted in favour of the Commonwealth giving power and legislation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, where our constitution was changed. In 1991, formal reconciliation began with the establishment of the Council of Aboriginal Reconciliation, which came out of the Royal Commission on Deaths and Custody of Aboriginal People. It was one of the recommendations. In 1992, we witnessed the Mabo decision. This was a landmark case which found for the first time that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had held a form of native title over their land prior to the arrival of the British. And in 2008, as I mentioned, the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd formally apologised to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who were taken from their families in the 19th and 20th centuries in Australia, known as the Stolen Generation. These are all remarkable achievements brought about by generations of people fighting for change. Today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, unfortunately, we make up over 25% of the prison incarceration numbers in Australia. In some of our states, like Northern Territory, there's 80% of our Aboriginal people make up the prison numbers. So we know that there's a long way to go. We know that racism still is rampant. We know that there is certain parts of our society which still don't get it. And we know that our people are still struggling on day-to-day life to be able to engage in education, employment, housing, and a number of these other issues, as well as trying to keep a culture strong and vibrant to hand on to the next generation. These are complex issues. They can't be taken lightly. And a lot of the time, and the welcome we had this morning, that there is a denial of basic human rights still happening in today's society to Indigenous people right across this world. Australia may seem to be a lucky country, or a country where a lot of people would like to move to and live, similar to Canada. But as first people of of Australia, and I'm sure this country, we feel the brunt of being excluded, not being a part of the decision making of the nation, not being a part of the fabric of the future and what the country will stand for. And time is changing, and I believe the wheels are moving in motion, and we've got to take this opportunity with both hands, because the platform that was laid before me with my elders, and I need to be able to step to the next level. It wasn't built for nothing, and there's a huge responsibility on my generation's shoulders in Australia, and hopefully we'll leave a footprint behind for our next generation to be able to step further again. It's going to take more than one term of government, we know that, and we've been trying to get this message across. Part of our conversation that we're having is that it's no longer an opportunity for Australia to have, here's one option, take it while you can, because the government really hasn't got enough resources or time to consider other options. Our people have continually been given only one piece of one option at a time, and then we internally have to fight over that, debate over that. I believe it's time for our nations to take, and Australia in particular, to take a longer term approach, maybe a 10 or 15 years, where all sides of government sign up to it. Doesn't matter who the Prime Minister of the day is, who the Minister is of the day. There is a commitment, not only financially but also politically, that we're going to achieve not only one particular improvement, if it's in employment or education, or in the Constitution, or how treaties are formed, but it's across a number of topics which we can debate, we can have time to talk about as a nation, as an Aboriginal nation, as well as the non-Indigenous people. And we can have a plan over 10 years or 15 years which can set our nation to a point where we can look back and say, we have now changed. We aren't grappling with the same issues which are confronting with us. The apology, in my sense, was one of those pointed times where the nation said, well, we've got to address this, we've got to say sorry. But in 2016, we've still got our children away from our families is greater than ever before. So we know that's not just the only thing that has to happen. There needs to be a number of things put into place. We know that 9 in 10 Australians agree that injustice has occurred because of European settlement. But would you believe in Australia, 9 in 10 agree that these injustices occurred because of European settlement, but yet only half of our population believes that the past race-based policies have created today's disadvantage. They'll say, well, this is nothing to do with what happened previously. This is, people just need to get up and get on with life. And a great speaker and advocate for Aboriginal affairs in Australia, Stan Grant, if anyone has seen his speech, talks about that particular phrase where non-Indigenous people say it's about time you Aboriginal people get up and just take stand up and move forward. We're saying it's very difficult to do that, and until you understand the past histories, non-Indigenous people will have a better understanding before they make those comments. So this tells us there's a long way to go. There's still a way to go. We need to continue to work. The historical wounds need to have time to heal, and every nation needs to allow that. But not only just to heal, but then to be able to empower, to be able to move forward, and to be given the space to be able to exercise that right to move forward. And this is something which I believe governments struggle with. Fundamentally, there may be a chance that governments don't fully trust Aboriginal people to handle their own affairs. And that's something which needs to be relearnt. And as I talk about with the future generation, it's not only in our communities about future generations, but also the future generations of non-Indigenous people. We've got a number of programs which we run. Our Reconciliation Action Plan program, or what we call the RAPS, has over 700 corporate bodies which have signed up to a structured approach to reconciliation, where they put pen to paper and they agree to meet milestones of employment or purchasing businesses, getting their executives a lot more culturally aware, and going through a process of making their companies a lot more in tune with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues and the histories of our country. We also have a program which is called Narragansett, which is focusing on 21,000 schools and early learning centres in Australia, because we believe the next generation is what's going to make this change. The children that are in schools now will be the future executives, prime ministers, etc., etc. The current group of leadership in Australia are just learning now about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and the value of what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people bring to our country. And a lot of them are saying, we're trying to unlearn some of the bad things that have been taught to us by our families. And we believe that as young people, the next generation coming through, the new leadership, the new generation, will be able to walk with us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as Indigenous people, be able to walk with us so we can build nations that are strong, that are robust, that know where their foundations are embedded, and that are built on the values of Indigenous people. I'd like to finish my talk at a little bit here, but I'd like to probably a challenge and to everyone in this room. My grandfather, who was a fairly wise old man, he told me a lot of different things. There's a few which I won't repeat here, but he was quite interested in his outlook in life. I'll tell you one which I can kind of put in the contents, but he did say to me once, and I was about 18, he said, there's 3 things you never lend anybody. He says it's your car, your football boots, and your wife. He said, because none of them ever come back the same. So my grandmother nearly fell off the chair when he told me. That was my 18th kind of talk for my grandfather. But his other wise words, and he dedicated his life to his family. He used to say continually to us grandchildren in particular, he probably said it to his children as well, but he used to say that you must challenge yourself in all areas of life and don't leave it for others to do. And I didn't really fully understand that. I just thought it was Pop just talking. Till I get older and I realised that if you wait for others to challenge you, sometimes you miss the opportunity. And you've lived in a state where you wish you'd done something sooner. So I urge today to each one in this room to challenge yourself, challenge your nation, challenge your leaders about how to develop innovative and new ways to drive reconciliation forward. And that we can honestly and truly realise the potential that our nations have, and particularly Australia and Canada, as I'm from Australia and we're here in Canada. But on the other side of things is that let's be brave enough and courageous enough to speak up, as we've heard earlier, when we do see wrongs that are being repeated, and that's even within our own communities, which I know it's pretty difficult. And if there is leaders, politicians, policies, legislation which is blocking progress for reconciliation, let's be a generation that will remove or replace those blocking obstacles so we can move forward in reconciliation and ensure that we as a nation can achieve our full potential. And I'll finish with this particular part, as I believe that as Indigenous people, we have so much to offer nations about nation building. For so often we've been pushed to the back blocks and seen as a deficit factor. When you mention Indigenous, Aboriginal, if you mention to the business or to the political world, I'm sure in their mind they'd think, here we go, this is going to be a tough conversation, or they speak about it in a deficit context. We need to do things to support you or to save you from yourselves, and there's all these terms which have been spoken about. But we as Indigenous people on this planet have looked after the land, we've lived harmonious with Mother Nature, we have worked it, we have raised families in the harshest climates and conditions. I'm sure Canada's no different to Australia. We have kept cultures alive, but not only alive, but striving and regenerating culture. And we know that cultures can die. There's plenty of stories of cultures that have died out. In Australia, we are really proud that over 40,000 years, our culture is still strong, our stories are still strong, our languages are being regenerated for the next generations and relearnt. And this is something which I think we can give to the rest of the world. The way we live, the way we work, the way we care for each other is something I think the world is looking for. And the environment, if that's the only thing that the world sees that we've got a connection with, well, we're experts. We may not have all the degrees or all the education around this, but we've got tens of thousands of years to say we know how it works, we know how this works. And then if we have a look at the way we operate in our structures, I believe that there's many structures in the corporate world and as well as government and workplaces are trying to make their workplaces a lot more places where the emotional and the physical and the mental side of working is also taken care of. So I believe that as Indigenous people, we've got so much to offer as internationally, and I'd like to hope to think that we can keep our relationship strong between Australia and Canada, as we think we've got a number of things that are similar, but also we can learn from each other in so many ways. Thank you.